tasked me to provide an assessment of the gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business. Initially, based on conversations with a physician who took the gateway training with me, I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Itzhak Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then, I found it necessary to delve into various sources for information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and functioning of human consciousness.
Ben Bentov is a wonderful, loving, kind man, brave, courteous, true, all the other kind things you can say. The interesting thing about him is that he has, over the years, conducted research into consciousness. The subtitle of his book is The Mechanics of Consciousness, and what we want to try to talk about today is one aspect of it, and that is the evolution of consciousness. The question I want to ask you is, where do you see us now in that evolutionary development?
Let me draw what is called a bell curve, which looks somehow like this. It's being used in describing random events. The bulk of the population today is this intelligent, more or less intelligent bipedal, right? And with a vertical spine, and who pushes the buttons on TV and drives a car, etc., etc. Now, there is some backthrow. That is, there are some people here in this area, very few people who are still gorilla-like. That is, they are hairy, they beat their chest when they see their neighbors and a few other things. And then we have other people who are here in this corner, very few of them, who are very highly developed, because we say that evolution is now pushing mankind in this direction, away from the gorilla types, towards the very highly evolved people. At this point, we're here. What's going to happen maybe 1 million years from now, 500,000 years from now? This curve is going to shift. It's going to shift like this. That is, the bulk of the population will be very, very highly evolved. We have gone away altogether from the gorilla types, no more gorillas. And what we have here now is the average man is now the retarded person, in evolutionary terms. The bulk of the population is extremely, very, very highly evolved, and the cutting edge of evolution here, these are very, very highly evolved people. We can't even imagine what kind of person that will be. He may not have a physical body at all. What's the habitat, so to speak, of this group here? Well, you just go out and you find them. They're all over the place. The habitat of this group here, what do you think? Where do you think you find these people here?
I suspect you would find them in universities. You'd find the people who are very bright, people who are in the leading edge of professions. That kind of thing. I mean, it's an intellectual thing.
Well, I suggest that you find them in mental hospitals, in nut houses. And the reason for that is that these people, they live in a different reality, in a reality which is very changed, and few of them are adapted to live in this reality, so naturally they can't function very well.
How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you here?
That's difficult to answer.
Could you give me some idea?
Offhand, I can't.
Whose idea was it that you come here?
A psychiatrist.
And what happened that ended up with your being here in the hospital?
The psychiatrist decided that this was the situation for me.
So the only safe place, only good place for them would be the mental hospital, unless they can integrate their different view of reality with their daily lives.
The Tourette syndrome, this is where people have nervous tics.
Yeah, there tend to be sudden violent movements and tics and impulses, and
It's often associated or maybe associated with great bursts of creativity.
it can go with it. In general, the mind is swifter. Associations can be accelerated, things can be noticed at great speed. Sometimes one has the feeling of people with Tourette syndrome moving and fast forward. The question is then really whether they can hold together and whether they can integrate.
Now, if they can integrate it, then we have people like Newton, like Darwin, like Faraday. These are the so-called geniuses.
The thing that I'm not certain that we have talked about is, what is it that is evolving?
Let's put it this way. The nervous system is the thing that is evolving, and the nervous system is supported by a skeleton of bones and muscles and tissue, etc., etc. Now, the nervous system is that thing that gives us the picture of our realities. That is, our realities, that reality which you see all around you, the flowers and the chairs and the microphones and the teacup, is given to us by our senses. All our senses are limited. So, with these limited senses, we naturally are seeing through a very narrow kind of tube or very narrow slit in the total reality there is.
We perceive the entire universe through this little tiny slit of colors we call visible light. To us, that's the universe, everything, right? But in reality, it's not. It's just a tiny little sliver.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you're evolving, what happens is that slit opens up more and more and more. So you see more and more of that reality, and we assume that we see different realities. They're not very different realities, but rather a very extended, broad view of one very large reality. The Bible mentions maybe 4 to 6 colors maximum.
Yeah.
That is what people saw just bare maybe 4,000 years ago. Nowadays, we see hundreds and thousands of colors. That is, our visual system has evolved. Mm-hmm. Our fellow mammals, like cows and horses, see only black and white. Uh-huh. So this is one example of the evolution of the nervous system. The senses are an extension of our nervous system. Our eyes, our ears, etc., are an extension of our brain. So to speak.
Okay, so now, before you were talking about the people who were the mutants, either being in the mental hospitals or being geniuses. Yeah. These are people who have expanded perception, and hence they can see a reality which ordinary people at this stage of evolution are not able to see.
Correct.
What is the nature of that reality which they're able to see?
Well, that is classified as a non-physical reality sometimes. We can take an example, say, well, let's take a simple example. The family sitting at dinner table, he looks up and suddenly he says to his mother, "Hey, Ma, look at, there's our dead grandmother is standing in the corner." Mother looks around and says, there's no grandmother there. And she says, well, kiddo, there's something wrong with you. You need help. This is called a psychotic episode or acute schizophrenic break or whatever it is.
And what you would say is that there's a good chance that that kid is seen.
Very good chance that the kid has a spontaneous opening of his senses.
So that the evolution has been rushed up or hurried up?
Yeah. Now, this actually happens. There are techniques to do this. But the Eastern people, the yogis, have developed systems to do this, to push the nervous system rapidly. But it happens very often spontaneously without someone trying to do anything about it, and it just happens.
How would you, as a higher intelligence, represent yourself to a lesser intelligence? Well, let's go back to pre-civilization. Maybe you show yourself as the spirits in the forest, and you give messages through that. Once you get a little bit more civilized, then you show yourself as the gods. And then you're God. Well, we don't believe in God anymore necessarily. Not everybody does. So what do we believe in? We believe in technology. So you show yourself as a form of technology, right? But the common thread is you're not alone. And there's something else here with you. And there's something that's, as you said, watching you. And at least watching over your shoulder.
What is it that is evolving? Now, you talked about the nervous system evolving, right? But is there something else that is evolving that is able to be sensitive to this higher level of reality?
We have this notion of a soul. We don't have souls, but it's just the other way around. The soul has us. That thing that evolves, the permanent, eternal thing, is the soul, and the body is a kind of disposable thing.
And so it's the soul which is experiencing evolution, and not our personality, not our physical existences.
That is, the soul is the repository of information that we gather during life. Well, I'll tell you, maybe we should draw another diagram. Physical bodies are here, another physical body, and this is Joe, and this is Jim, and this is Sarah, etc. Now, clearly, this is the physical level, yeah? Now, on this physical level, we're all separate. You sit there, and I sit here, and we're all separate. Now, let's draw another level. This level is slightly higher, and let's call this the level of the soul, yeah? Well, there will be some mingling here. Let's draw this person as extending to practically infinity this way. Now look what happens. At the physical level, we're separate, and there's this much distance between us. Let's say that on the soul level, this person extends this much, and the other person gets slightly mixed in with him. That is, the souls are in a way in touch with each other. Okay, they overlap, these two lines. Now let's go now to a higher level, and let's call this, say, the level of the higher self, which is kind of a boss of that soul. There, what we find is that this fellow's higher self extends this much, and the other fellow's extends this much. There is more overlap between them. On the very highest level, which is the high spiritual level, we are basically overlapping completely. Everybody is overlapping everybody else. In other words, everything and everyone is everywhere. In other words, we've become omnipresent. This is a state of highly spiritual, perfected beings, or gods, you may call them. Okay?
Okay, and so that we exist on all of those simultaneously.
On all of them simultaneously, so then, but we're not aware of them.
In your view, then, if when we see each other as separate entities, that's only seen on one plane of reality.
Correct. And so whether we like it or not, we're all evolving towards godhood. But you know, it takes eons, so don't hold your breath.
Is that the purpose of evolution?
Naturally. Because at that point, you start understanding how the system works. And one of the good things about this system is that the system wants to teach you about itself.
Perhaps they realize who it is that they're talking to. And they say, rather than muddy the picture, we're only going to give them limited information. Right? And yeah, maybe we could sit down like you and I and have a conversation. But then they would make assumptions. The humans would then make assumptions about us that aren't true. Because we're not humans. Right? So let's stay at arm's length. Let's just let them know that we're here. Right? And here's the limited amount of communication. Again, this notion that if you give somebody everything, they'll get lazy. And, you know, if they've been around as long as they have, they've seen every kind of thing that can go wrong. Mm-hmm. And so it's they know, as much as they might want to step in, that would be a wrong thing.
Could the UFO phenomenon be manipulating us? Could it be a teaching system of some sort? Perhaps something that we are creating ourselves, and perhaps a series of images that we are projecting. I think Carl Jung came very close to expressing that idea in one of his books.
Well, Jung is the only thinker I've ever seen who, you know, we hypothesized earlier in some sense that artistic intuition lays out the map for the development of propositional thinking. Well, Jung traced the development of that intuitive pattern-seeking imagination back like 3,000 years. That's partly why he talks about astrology. So when we looked up in the night sky, let's see, prior to the development of astronomy, what we saw, we didn't know what we were looking at, right? It filled us with awe, but we didn't know what we were looking at. So we populated the sky with figures of our imagination. That's the constellations, and it was a way of orienting ourselves. So if you look at astrology, psychologically, what you have is a vast storehouse of the contents of the human imagination. Now, in astrology, there was the idea of a certain kind of progression through the eons. Well, Jung believed that the fantasy that underlied astrology was so deep that it had sketched out the map for the trail that we're actually walking down.
I don't understand.
And so
that.
reading it, well, so the artists have intuitions about what's coming. So they're the first people in the unexplored territory, and then the more propositional philosophers and such, and the scientists, they fill in the details. But the trailblazing has already been done by the imaginative and the intuitive.
Right.
And so Jung, in Ion, Jung tracks, well, that's okay. In Ion, Jung tracks the contents of that imagination back several thousand years, and also lays out something like a scheme for the future. So, for example, he believed that, this is so strange, man. He believed that the idea that there were wise men who saw a star that signified Christ's birth was actually a reference to the astrological idea that something new would be born at the dawn of the age of Pisces. Pisces,
how does that get to one
fish.
star?
Well, because they were interpreters of the stars.
You could telefactor information into the sensory system of a human, right? But then each human is a little bit different. So either you know enough about them to tailor it to that individual, or you just basically take advantage of whatever the sensory net is that individual has. So if you happen to be good at sound, or you happen to be a very visually inclined individual, then maybe the sensory information that you get that's most effective in terms of transmitting information would come through that portal.
How many musicians get songs in dreams? Yeah. Chris Bledsoe is a famous abductee from North Carolina, and he said that I was told by the Guardians, he called them the Guardians, that the message is in the music. He mentioned two songs. One was Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. But it was the second one he got me. He said Neil Young, After the Gold Rush. And I said, Neil Young?
Well, I dreamed I saw the silver spaceships lying in the yellow haze of the sun. There were children crying and colors flying all around the chosen ones. All in a dream, all in a dream. The loading had begun. We were flying Mother Nature's silver sea to a new home in the sun.
It basically says, we're treating the world like a gold rush. And when the gold is gone, it's going to become a ghost town. And the silver seeds, the flying saucers, are going to come down and take the chosen ones to another planet. And now we identify the experiences as the chosen ones. Dolly Parton asked him, what's it mean? Neil, what's the thing behind it? He said, I have no idea. I was totally stoned when I wrote it. I have no idea. Each verse may mean something different. So he said, no, I was stoned when I wrote the song. I have no idea what it means. How many musicians get songs in dreams? You're in a conscious environment where your left brain is running things, it's keeping you in the physical world, and then during a dream or something, you pop into this other world and you bring back stuff. So all musicians are right brain creative people, whereas the scientific people are left brain creative people. They don't have these inspirations, but musicians are on the edge, and a lot of musicians did psychedelic drugs, and that shuts down the left hemisphere, pops you into that sort of alternate, non-local world, and they bring this stuff back. So it's a very weird thing when you start looking at where does music come from. Because most musicians, you're sitting there and you're waiting for an inspiration, you're waiting for something to come, and they're sitting there waiting for an inspiration to come, and that's basically how it's working. And there's even, I'm now going to do a thing on lucid dreaming. How many people can use lucid dreaming? If you can learn to lucid dream, you can actually go into the lucid dream and pick up songs. Right. And there's a guy actually here that has the Pyramids on Mars. He's the musician here, and he tells a story about getting this dream where he hears this guy sing a song or play a song, and he comes back and he reproduces the song. And a number of musicians will talk about this as well. And the difference between music and regular dreams is that in regular dreams, it's all like crazy stuff and nothing makes sense or whatever. But in a dream, the music is not distorted. The music is exactly as it is. So they come back and they can recreate exactly what they heard.
Humankind is evolving at a rate that is, I mean, we're in the age of Aquarius now. Like, it's just like humans are evolving, and the faculty of the human race that's evolving is consciousness. It's the brain. It's parts in the brain that allow us to use like that extra sense, that sixth sense. You want to hear something crazy, dude? I just thought about this, but when I was in Diana Walsh Pasolka's office, for those who don't know who that is the scholar of philosophy and religion at the University of Wilmington, North Carolina, who was a consultant for like X number of Hollywood films, like The Conjuring, and she got involved with my family many years ago. My dad introduced her to a guy by the name of Timothy Taylor. He's this like member of the Department of Defense, and she like got into some contracts with them. She wrote a whole book about it. It's called
American Cosmic.
American Cosmic. Yep, it's called.
I'm looking at it right now. I got it right over there.
Yeah. It's called and she got involved with like elements of the Department of Defense from meeting my dad and things like that. And when I was in her office a few years ago, dude, this was classified at the time. But
bro, hello, you know your family is thanked in that book.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, she literally straight up shouts out the Bledsoe family. Like, your family is in the book, basically.
And anyway, so when I was in her office a few years ago catching up with her, like I first moved to Wilmington, which is where she lives too, you know. And I was sitting there, and she like made me put my phone in the other room, super paranoid about like people spying on us and things like that, and put my phone in the other room. We had this riveting conversation, and one of the things she told me, dude, was what she had learned from the Invisible College, which for the listener who doesn't know, I'll just catch you up really briefly. The Invisible College is a very high level elite scientific community within the Department of Defense and academia, like college, you know, universities and such. And one of the things that they told her was that the human race is evolving, and there's a part of the brain she didn't, at the time she wouldn't tell me the part of the brain. She said it was classified.
So this is no longer classified?
No, I'm about to tell you what it is. But she told me that was one of the things in the Invisible College that they knew, that they could detect from this element of the brain that is evolved, who has psychic potential. Like, everybody has psychic potential to a degree, but there are certain people being born throughout the human race who have an evolved caudate putamen. This is what she told me. She said, I don't know the part of the brain, it's classified, but I know that they know in the Invisible College in the United States Department of Defense. She said, I know they know that your family is incredibly psychic, and they construct these elite groups in the Department of Defense based on other psychics with this evolved part of the brain. They had detected that the caudate putamen. Later, I found out the research was declassified by this guy named like Gary Nolan or something like that. Did the research, another figure in her book.
What's common about the brain of people who encounter UFOs?
When we were looking at the brains of these individuals, we noticed something right in the center of the basal ganglia in many of these individuals that at first we thought was damage. It was basically an enriched patch of MRI-dense neurons that we thought was damage, but then it was showing up in everybody, and then we looked and we said, oh, it's actually not. The other readings on these MRIs show that actually that's living tissue. That's actually the head of the caudate and the putamen. And at the time, and I remember even asking a good friend of mine at Stanford, who is a psychiatrist, what does the basal ganglia do? He said, oh, the basal ganglia is just about movement and nerve and motor control. And I said, well, that's odd, because these other papers that we were reading at the time started to suggest that it was involved with higher intelligence and is actually downstream of the executive function and involved with intuition and planning. And if you think about it, if you're going to have motor control, which is centralized in one place, motor control requires knowledge of the environment. You don't want to move something and hit the table. Or if you're walking across a room, you want to be aware and cognizant of what you might bump into. So obviously, all of that planning requires access to all the senses.
So this is one example of the evolution of the nervous system. The senses are an extension of our nervous system. Our eyes, our ears, etc., are an extension of our brain.
It requires access to your desires, memory, knowledge of where and what you want, and desire to walk near or by. Like I use the example of you're at a party, you want to avoid that person, you like that person, the waiter's about to drop something. All without thinking, you maneuver.
Okay, and so that we exist on all of those simultaneously.
On all of those simultaneously,
so then,
but we're not aware of that.
In your view, then, when we see each other as separate entities, that's only seen on one plane of reality.
Correct.
So that actually, all that planning is done in the basal ganglia, and it's actually now called the brain within the brain. It's a goal processing system, subservient to executive function. So what we think we found there was not something which allows people to talk to UFOs. I mean, I think the UFO community took it a step too far. What I think we found was a form of higher functioning and processing.
Let's go now to a higher level, and let's call this, say, the level of the higher self, which is kind of a boss of the soul.
So what we then looked at, and this was the most fascinating part of it, we looked then at individuals in the families of those, let's say the index case individuals, and we found that it was actually in families. And more so, this is the most fascinating part, we've probably looked now at about 200 just random cases that you can download off of databases online. You don't see this higher connectivity. You only find it in what Kit Green would have called, or has called, higher functioning individuals, people who are, he called them savants. I don't have the means to, we haven't done the testing.
Now, take like this fellow, St. Paul, yeah? He's going or walking or riding to Damascus in the olden days, and suddenly this big ball of white light descends, and Jesus standing in the ball of light, and says, hey, why don't you lay off of my people and stop doing whatever you're doing and all that? And he's very impressed, and he's even blinded, and he falls down, and one thing and another. But anyway, he makes it somehow to Damascus, and there he starts a big campaign, and he talks about his experience and the big public relations thing, and he got the thing going. He got the church built, and the Judeo-Christian ethic came out of this, and bingo, and all the things that, that go with this. So we've got something.
Yeah.
Now, suppose the same thing would happen, and this fellow, so St. Paul, say, is driving down on Route 128.
The Vatican Archive, it has so much that's not yet translated into different languages, into even modern languages. And there's so much there that can tell us about what we are experiencing now.
In the olden days, these kinds of things used to be called miracles.
Evidence to suggest that humans are evolving new sensory capabilities that may allow us to see new realities or dimensions of existence. Could these new realities help explain the so-called paranormal events common throughout human history? Is the UFO phenomenon revealing an unseen world with unknown intelligences? Or are all of these mysteries actually revealing something about ourselves and our place in the universe?
Of the psychologists who've dealt with these problems, and there have been many, for me, Carl Jung says the most.
Fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless. It is, say, a form of energy.
Okay, so now, before you were talking about the people who were the mutants, either being in the mental hospitals or being geniuses. These are people who have expanded perception, and hence they can see a reality which ordinary people at this stage of evolution are not able to see. What is the nature of that reality which they're able to see?
Well, that is classified as a non-physical reality.
Dreams and mythological representations share an essentially narrative structure. It's not so unreasonable to notice that a dream at night is like the movie that you play in your head. And it's not unreasonable to note as well that the dreams that you have at night bear a relationship to the daydreams that you have during the day. It's a form of cognition. It seems like an involuntary form of cognition, though, and that's a very strange thing. So Jung thought about the dream as nature speaking of its own accord. And so his idea was, well, when you sleep, you dream, but the dream happens to you. It's not something that you create the way that, and you don't even think about creating it. Because I might say, well, what are you thinking about? And you'll say, I'm thinking about whatever it is, and you'll take credit in some sense for thinking that because it seems like a voluntary activity. But what happens at night is that you think, but you think involuntarily. And so what Jung would say is that means that something is thinking in you. There are things that think in you. What are those things? And what are they thinking? And why are they thinking it?
In the time before Reformation, people dreamt of the great change. And that's the reason why such great transformations could be predicted. If somebody has been clever enough to see what there is going on in people's mind, in the unconscious mind, would be able to predict it. For instance, I have predicted the Nazi rising in Germany through the observation of my German patients. They had dreams in which the whole thing was anticipated, and with considerable detail.
You suggest that UFOs are deliberately trying to manipulate our subconscious mind to create a mythology in our culture about themselves, which is one of the reasons that they're both physical and concrete, yet very elusive at the same time. Do you still feel that way?
Could the UFO phenomenon be manipulating us? Could it be a teaching system of some sort? Perhaps something that we are creating ourselves, perhaps a series of images that we are projecting.
Why do you think we dream? What place do we go to when we dream? And why are they useful? Not just the assimilation aspect, but just like all the crazy visuals that we get with dreams.
I suspect that dreaming is more metabolically costly as a conscious experience than not dreaming. So you could still have REM sleep, but absent the conscious experience of dreaming was probably less metabolically costly. And we've now since discovered that dreams have a function. The first, as we mentioned, creativity. The second is that dreams provide a form of overnight therapy. Dreaming is a form of emotional first aid. And it's during dream sleep at night that we take these difficult, painful experiences that we've had during the day, sometimes traumatic, and dream sleep acts almost like a nocturnal soothing balm. And it sort of just takes the sharp edges off those difficult, painful experiences so that you come back the next day and you feel better about them. It's not time that heals all wounds. It's time during dream sleep that provides emotional convalescence. What we've discovered is that people who are going through a very difficult experience, a trauma, for example, a very painful divorce, those people who are dreaming, but dreaming of that difficult event itself, they go on to gain resolution to their clinical depression 1 year later. Whereas people who were dreaming just as much, but not dreaming about the trauma itself, did not go on to gain as much clinical resolution to their depression.
So that's fascinating. This definitely is applied in much cruder ways in artificial intelligence. So one context in which this is applied is the process called self-play. which is reinforcement learning, where agents play against itself or versions of itself, and it's all simulated of trying different versions of themselves and playing against each other to see what ends up being a good.
No, I think it's been a theory that's been put forward, which is that dreaming is a virtual reality test space that is largely consequence-free.
Yeah.
What an incredible gift to give a conscious mind each and every night.
The dream is trying to tell you what it's trying to tell you as clear as it can. That's just the best it can do. And so you could think of the dream, and this is, I believe, the right way to think about it. The dream is the birthplace of thought, the same way that artists are the birthplace of culture. It's exactly the same process. It's that your mind is groping outward to try to comprehend what it has not yet comprehended. And it does that first by trying to map it onto image.
This orb, huge thing, was hovering right over where she got killed. It's what it did, it spoke to me in a way that I understood in these images.
What the spirits of form want to achieve with us until the end of our earthly development must first be embodied in images, and these images will later be instrumental in transforming humanity. They will then become real.
Synchronicity is a concept developed by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung to explain meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by cause and effect relationships. According to Jung, synchronicity occurs when two or more events are meaningfully related, but are not causally connected. Rather, they are connected by an underlying principle of meaningfulness or purpose. Jung believed that synchronicity is a manifestation of the collective unconscious, a universal storehouse of human experience and knowledge that we all have access to at an unconscious level. He argued that meaningful coincidences are not random, but instead are a result of the universe communicating with us through symbolic events.
I wrote about synchronicity in American Cosmic. I've talked about some of the things that happened to me with respect to synchronicity. And I have to say that it's much, much more interesting to me than it ever was in my life, because I'm beginning to understand it as almost like a force of its own.
We are born into a pattern. We are a pattern. We are a structure that is pre-established through the genes. It is a biological order of our mental functioning. As for instance, our biological or physiological function follows a pattern. Or the behavior of any bird or insect follows a pattern, and that is the same with us. Man has a certain pattern that makes him specifically human, and no man is born without it.
The stuff that the world is made of is partly something like attention, something like consciousness, and that has a pattern. And that pattern is the same pattern as stories. It doesn't lay itself out exactly the same, but things exist with a pattern which is similar to stories.
Few myths are more exciting than tales of great heroes and the foes they encounter in their adventures. Such heroic quests are found in tales from cultures across the globe and throughout history. But there are often striking similarities between such stories. The mighty warrior who's all but invulnerable to harm, the witches and wizards who help or hinder, the menacing giants, the beguiling temptations, the journeys into dark caves or into the depths of the underworld, all are found in tales from different cultures and different times. But what if there was more to these echoes than mere coincidence? That was the belief of an American mythologist named Joseph Campbell. In the countless stories that he read and analyzed, Campbell thought he spotted something. A pattern.
The Hero with a Thousand Faces was published in 1949, drawing on the pioneering works of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and others. Campbell outlined the recurring stages he had identified in story after story. from culture after culture. He dubbed it the hero's journey.
Why the hero with 1,000 faces?
Well, because there is a certain typical hero sequence of actions, which can be detected in stories from all over the world and from many, many periods of history. And I think it's essentially, you might say, the one deed done by many, many different people.
Why are there so many stories of the hero or of heroes in mythology?
Well, because that's what's worth writing about. I mean, even in popular novel writing, you see, the main character is a hero or a heroine. That is to say, someone who has found or achieved or done something beyond the normal range of achievement and experience. A hero properly is someone who has given his life to something bigger than himself or other than himself.
So in all of these cultures, whatever the costume the hero might be wearing, what is the deed?
Well, there are two types of deed. One is the physical deed, the hero who has performed a war act or a physical act of heroism, saving a life, that's a hero act. Giving himself, sacrificing himself to another. And the other kind is the spiritual hero who has learned or found a mode of experiencing the supernormal range of human spiritual life. And that is the basic motif of the hero journey. Leaving one condition, finding the source of life to bring you forth in a richer or more mature or other condition.
There is more to the universe than what we can see or observe with our physical senses. Jungian synchronicity takes this idea one step further by suggesting that the seemingly random events and coincidences in our lives are not just chance occurrences, but are actually part of a larger narrative structure that is woven throughout the universe. This narrative structure is revealed to us through the meaningful coincidences and synchronicities that we experience in our lives. These events are not just isolated incidents, but are interconnected and part of a larger story that is constantly unfolding. By paying attention to these synchronicities and the patterns they reveal, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, our place in the world, and the interconnectedness of all things. In this way, synchronicity is not just a random occurrence, but a reflection of the underlying narrative structure of the universe.
I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. You know, that's Jungian synchronicity. And I've seen that many times in my own life.
You know, Jacques, back in the day, and even today, you know, still grapples with this idea of synchronicity and ties it into this invisible college, which is an early modern idea of Rosicrucianism, actually.
Now, first thing I would say about the Rosicrucian tradition is that the Rosicrucian tradition is one of the most recent of the great traditions on the planet. If you go back to the Vedic tradition in India, Tibetan tradition, etc., many others, they're very ancient. But the Rosicrucian tradition really only broke the surface in human history in the 1600s. The first Rosicrucian documents appeared in the 1600s with texts like Fama Fraternitatis in 1604 in Germany. Now, when these Rosicrucian texts first became available, one of the things that they emphasized in these texts was that the Rosicrucian organization wasn't connected to any one authoritative teacher, and it wasn't connected to any particular type of control structure. There was no institution for it. It was really a very free and independent path of modern initiation. This fits within their understanding of the evolution of human consciousness, that we have attained a state today where there is actually a transition from an external human guru-based system to one in which the awakening of the human I am presence becomes the guru. and connects directly to spiritual forces without a human intermediary. So one of the discernment points that we have within the Rosicrucian system is that there are 3 different aspects of initiation or becoming an initiate. In one of these, what is actually being illuminated begins with the thinking process, with actually knowing about non-physical realities, knowing about the greater spiritual realities that we come from, and the spiritual depths of oneself. This is linked to the spiritual centers inside the head. And this is also linked to the illumination of the thinking process, so that with this process we actually know consciously the structure of the spiritual worlds, how we interact with them, how they influence us on a daily basis. In this path of illumination, we find that everything is a thought form from the mind of God, and all those thought forms have a pattern to them. And the current term that we use for understanding those patterns is sacred geometry. So sacred geometry is a universal science for understanding the patterns of creation at every level, whether it's how the different spirituals are constructed, or different ranks of spiritual beings and their consciousness, or the different subtle bodies of a human being, whatever it plays, it has a pattern to it. And so no matter what tradition you study with, they will work with sacred geometry. Because the sacred geometry at the highest level is a pure packed thought form from the mind of God that shows you the pure pattern of everything that's manifested from it.
We are born into a pattern. We are a pattern.
And if we can think about space-time, space-time we experience, so I'm going to talk about dimensions. So we experience time in a linear fashion. It looks to us linear. Easy to say it's linear, but physicists tell us that it's not, okay? So it is something that is so we only see a portion of it. We only see what we can see of it. So I think that synchronicity is something very similar to this, and that those people who experience it, they're experiencing things that are not within this dimension. That's what. Now, am I going to do a peer-reviewed, no, I'm not going to, because people will say, oh, this sounds pretty crazy.
Deep in the forebrain sit a group of nuclei that integrate all cortical activity into one behavioral output. These are the basal ganglia. These deep nuclei are interconnected with each other and with all areas of the CNS. A series of parallel circuits regulates different aspects of behavior. One circuit is primarily involved in the integration of motor output. Another circuit plays a major role in learning and cognition. And finally, a third circuit regulates emotional aspects of behavior. So what does this mean? You can tell when someone's having a good day or a bad day by their posture, body language, and even their tone of voice. The sum of all experiences, hours of practice, memory, emotion, reward seeking, and the plan for a particular movement are all integrated and result in one behavioral output due to the coordinated activity within the basal ganglia.
The Rosicrucians talk about a process within an initiation in which at a certain point, when the heart becomes open and unarmored, and we cultivate this feeling of unconditional love, there is an ignition of a kind of spiritual spark within the heart. And what happens then is that they describe it as an etheric rose light arises from the heart and moves up to what's commonly called the third eye center. And with that rose etheric stream, it enters into the centers in the head, that area that is technically at the third ventricle of the brain and was known as the cave of Brahma in the Indian teachings. This is a particular area that's open in the head that has a space between the pineal and pituitary glands. And as this space becomes illuminated, it leads to direct spiritual vision.
What's common about the brain of people who encounter UFOs?
So the study started with a group of, let's say a cohort of individuals that were brought to me and their MRIs to ask about the damage that had been seen in these individuals. It was basically an enriched patch of MRI dense neurons that we thought was damage, but then it was showing up in everybody, and then we looked and they said, oh, it's actually not. The other readings on these MRIs show that actually that's living tissue. That's actually at the head of the caudate and the putamen.
This is a particular area that's open in the head.
And at the time, and I remember even asking a good friend of mine at Stanford, who is a psychiatrist, what does the basal ganglia do? You know, these other papers that we were reading at the time started to suggest that it was involved with higher intelligence and is actually downstream of the executive function. So what we think we found there was not something which allows people to talk to UFOs. I mean, I think the UFO community took it a step too far. What I think we found was a form of higher functioning and processing.
This is then a clairvoyant. The clairvoyant can actually perceive non-physical realities. But depending upon the individual, they may not consciously understand the structures or discern the different things that they are actually seeing.
This actually happens. There are techniques to do this. People, the yogis, have developed systems to do this, to push the nervous system rapidly. But it happens very often spontaneously without someone trying to do anything about it. And it just happens. And then, naturally, in the olden days, these kinds of things used to be called miracles.
I think of it as an intelligence test. Can you see what's in front of you for what it really is? Yeah. Can you see the anomalous data point that is there that you realize what it is? I mean, when the South American native tribes first saw the Spanish ships coming across the horizon, they didn't realize what it was. They couldn't see it for what it was. So, you know, this is, as I said before, this is the kind of the wow factor, that they're showing up, they're saying, well, who amongst you are intelligent enough to realize what it is that you're looking at? Yeah. They don't have to land on the White House lawn. We can always make the joke about, is there intelligence in DC at all, right? You just need to show yourself to enough to acculturate. Yeah. Now, if you've been around for a long time, and this is something that I do think has been, they've been around for a long time, they are affecting our culture.
The dream is the birthplace of thought, the same way that artists are the birthplace of culture.
When you go into dream sleep, it is a neurochemical cocktail like no other that we see at the rest of the 24-hour state. There is a chemical called noradrenaline or norepinephrine in the brain, and you know of its sister chemical in the body called adrenaline. But upstairs in the brain, noradrenaline is very good at creating a very hyper-focused, attentive, where it's just you and I in this moment. I don't even know what's going on elsewhere. I am with you. Noradrenaline is present. Mm-hmm. But when you go into REM sleep, it is the only time during the 24-hour period where your brain is devoid of any noradrenaline. It is completely shut off. Mm-hmm. And so the signal to noise ratio is very different. It's almost as though we're injecting a greater amount of noise into the neural architecture of the brain during dream sleep, as if it's chemically brute forced into this relaxed, associative memory processing state. Emotional centers, memory centers, visual centers, motoric centers, all of those centers actually become more active. In fact, some of them are more active than when we're awake in the dream state.
That's not normal. Sound, or you happen to be a very visually inclined individual, then maybe the sensory information that you get that's most effective in terms of transmitting information would come through that portal.
I looked up in the sky, and here was this enormous craft that looks like a huge like diamond-shaped thing up in the sky.
I heard a woman shriek.
I heard shouting that woke me up.
I heard the footsteps, fairly heavy ones, going upstairs to the 3rd floor.
And then there was some movement on top of a box that was already sitting there on the floor.
I saw the silhouette of a man and a woman.
I haven't been alone in the house since that time.
It was hard for me to, accept, because it was so real.
You know, and you're so positive someone is there. And no one. Oh, no one. Very unusual.
We don't have souls, but it's just the other way around. The soul has us. So that thing that evolves, the permanent, eternal thing, is the soul, and the body is a kind of disposable thing.
In your view, then, if when we see each other as separate entities, that's only seen on one plane of reality.
Correct. And so whether we like it or not, we're all evolving towards godhood. But you know, it takes eons, so don't hold your breath. If you are omnipresent and you're all-knowing, that is the state which the system wants you to be in. Because the system is an intelligence or information gathering system. And it's also freely distributing that information.
In your view,
yeah.
We all started off somewhere a long time ago in which there was sort of undifferentiated matter, which slowly, millions and millions and millions of eons, evolved until a very complex organism that we now call a human being. And it has a nervous system which we at this particular point in time understand as being sensitive to certain levels of reality through our eyes, our ears, our nose, other sensory perception. And that's sort of what we call material, ordinary reality that enables us to drive cars and do our work every day. However, there is an evolutionary movement that will continue to push us beyond where we are today. And the thing which is going to be pushed is our soul, and that at some point we will have these experiences of elevated consciousness in which higher realities are not only seen but lived, and ultimately we come into perfection.
Whether we like it or not.
Yeah? Can we speed that up by doing it?
Yeah. Well, you use the meditative techniques which push the nervous system a lot faster than the normal evolutionary rate. Those techniques are available, but you don't need to do anything. It's going to happen anyway.
It's going to happen. Whatever.
What's up, guys? You just watched my film. It's like a two-parter. It is pretty old. It's been in the mix for a while, but we had to touch on the Rosicrucians. Are they the first UFO cult? What does that mean to be a UFO religion? How could it be that this group is still around today and has its like traces, its like origins all the way back to Egypt? It's crazy. So we're going to get into it, and it's super complex unless you follow like a specific thread. And every time I bring this up to UFO researchers, they get really bummed out when I talk about it. And I think it's because it makes a lot of sense, but it could be because it's kind of convoluted. So in these in the video I just posted, you guys just watched, it took me a long time to get it onto YouTube because it just straight up ganks it off every time. YouTube hates that video. It really does. It finds something wrong with it every damn time I upload it. So that was actually the only way I could really sneak it out to you guys. But in it, I touch on Rosicrucianism, and I touch on a lot of stuff, like including like research by Gary Nolan and statements by like even like Elizondo and whatnot, and a lot of stuff from Pasolka and Jacques Vallée. So Pasolka, Jacques Vallée, Gary Nolan, these guys are like they're religious people. I mean, Diana Pasolka is a professor of religious studies at the University of South Carolina, North Carolina. I always get it mixed up. Gary Nolan's a scientist over at Stanford University, but also his own dude, and I think he's a Catholic. But then you have like Jacques Vallée, he's like got like white hair since Steve Martin has white hair, but like he is everywhere. Jacques Vallée's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on every single podcast about it, and he's super old. He's been in the mix since J. Allen Hynek, who developed the Close Encounter scale. And J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée are actually Rosicrucians. That's a known fact for sure. So like, why is that important? What are the Rosicrucians? Why do they believe what they believe? And how is it tied into UFOs? So let's get into it. Rosicrucianism really started in the 1600s, but they do trace their stuff all the way back again, like I said, to Egypt. Now, there's a great documentary by on a YouTube channel I'm going to play here, Agrippo's Diary. I strongly suggest to everybody go check that out. But there's this great documentary, this piece where it kind of goes into like really in depth of the introduction of it, like where it started and why it started. And really it's just mysticism. That's what you can kind of boil it down to. But they started to take and mix everything they could. So even the name Rosicrucianism is like a blend between like the rose and the cross, the rosy cross. That's another symbol of theirs, right? The idea that they're taking two perspectives on something and they're applying that to see another dimension within it. And that has to do with like physicality, spirituality, and whatnot. And so they were the only Westerners who were really messing around with things like the astral realm, and it got them into alchemy and all other kinds of stuff. Rosicrucians were like in the royal court for a long time. If you guys are familiar with like Sir Francis Bacon, he's one of these guys. They developed the scientific method. And so they're responsible for a ton of different things that related to progress, but the why they do that stuff I think is really important. Sure, they are responsible for a lot of these weird movements and these like really big like enlightened periods of time, but why were they doing it? Why were they trying to gain extra knowledge and information, especially in these darker times of human history? What was their goal? Was it accidental that they got people out of the dark ages? Was it accidental or was it purposeful? Like, we don't know. I'm having an issue with my camera, but that's all good. So as you can see here, you know what I mean? There is no shortage of symbolism and beauty within the Rosicrucian order and all this stuff. What their symbolism is really trying to do, though, is it's trying to it's like enlightenment. They're looking at things in an entirely new way, right? What they want to do is analyze nature to find out more about the internal world, the spiritual realm, the astral world. They actually start finding ways to consume and process different types of elements because they believe their chakras, which is something they borrowed from Eastern religions, right? They wanted to advance and balance their chakras so that they could think better, they could do better. Again, like this is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of common that spirituality people like they want to like advance, but why do they want to? What's their goal there? But these guys did it to push society forward. That was their biggest goal. They wanted to push humanity into a direction that would benefit everyone. They saw that as their responsibility. They really did. They saw that as their sole responsibility. So they took it upon themselves, right, to study the world, study themselves, study the idea of the soul in new novel ways, and they developed things that we still use today, like science. Again, I mentioned Sir Francis Bacon, who some people credit with the creation of the Shakespeare novels or Shakespeare plays. And I know a lot of people hate when I say that, right? But the Shakespeare plays are definitely not created by one person, in my opinion. That's my opinion. And I think that like a lot of people have come to that same conclusion. And there's so much symbology in the original, like even the covers of the Shakespeare plays and whatnot, that I think that it's fair to say that there's something a little bit more strange there, right? And so the alternative theory, besides a playwright, you know, a lowly actor or whatever in a pub, the William Shakespeare, the other option is that it's a pen name for a group of people. And there is a lot of paperwork to back up the idea that Sir Francis Bacon was the person who commissioned poets, linguists, philosophers, all these people to come and write these plays. And the reason they did it was to bring humans and society out of a dark age, right? And to use the storytelling and the play, right, theater, as a way to get information out and educate the public on new things and important things that help society, right? It's like a new Sermon on the Mount kind of thing. This is the creation of these guys. So, you know, they're not like the Freemasons, they're not the Knights Templar, although they are I mean, there's a more than a subtle relationship between these guys and Rosicrucians. I mean, way more. And you'll find out, I think, here, like, how direct is the connection between the UFO phenomena and this? How do we get from Shakespeare to the UFO phenomena, right? Like, what is it? And you find it in the people, right? So in the people who are super Rosicrucians and, like, you know, like, are currently Rosicrucians, or at the very least practice this stuff, you find them in the heads of technology and the heads of this, like, really, like, interesting subjects, right? Like Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée is interesting because he talks about something called the invisible college, and I'll play it here. Like, check this out. Check this out. This is on the right-hand side. This is Sir Francis Bacon. I think this guy over here is Johannes Valentine or something like that, but he's an interesting cat. But it's what plays right afterwards. I think this is super interesting.
Of the Rosicrucian order and the authorship of the manifestos remain a mystery to this day. It's more likely that the Rosicrucian texts were the product of a collaborative effort by a group of like-minded individuals. In fact, some tie the formation of the Rosicrucian order to the Invisible College, the precursor group to the Royal Society of London. The concept of Invisible College...
All right. A lot of people in ufology know about the Invisible College, right? Like, a lot of people do. But I mean, some people don't. And, like, what is it? Well, how often does it come up? And it's literally a group. There's a group in ufology that self-identifies as the Invisible College. How do I know that? Because this dude here, my boy Jacques Vallée, literally wrote a book called The Invisible College, and this is what's on the cover: what a group of scientists has discovered about UFO influence on the human race. You see what I'm saying? Like, the Invisible College isn't like like, this guy wrote the book, dude. They just said
is meant knowledge. The authorship of the manifestos remain a mystery to this day. It's more likely that the Rosicrucian texts were the product of a collaborative effort by a group of like-minded individuals. In fact, some tie the formation of the Rosicrucian order to the Invisible College.
All right. See what I'm saying? See what I'm saying? These guys are pushing. This is like their job, dude, is to push society forward. And as they do, they intend to, like, watch the evolution take place of the human consciousness. And a lot of the reasons why they do what they do is because they want to see the universe fully, right? They believe that, like, through understanding the universe fully, we understand ourselves better. This is, like, reaches us more towards godhood. These are like scientist monks. I don't know how else to describe it. All right, but they're in the mix. And yeah, they got they're full on, right? They love this idea. Technology is one of the things that will kind of bring us there in terms of what they think. Again, you have Jacques Vallée in the mix, who came up with, well, he was on the team for DARPANET of the internet. You know, he's been on the forefront of, like, a lot of technological things, but also on this idea of UFOs and them being super interesting. Like, people see a face next to UFOs and they think automatically, like, oh, he must believe in aliens from another planet. That's actually the opposite of what this guy believes. Jacques Vallée does not believe in aliens from another planet. He's like, dude, for real, like, it would be much more interesting if they were something else. Maybe they mean something to us. Maybe they're symbolic for something. Right. Then you got a protege of Jacques Vallée's. You got Gary Nolan. And this is why I've rolled those documentaries first. Because, like, it was important for you guys to see this stuff. Like look into it. But Gary Nolan is a protege of this guy, a member of the Invisible College, right? And that's their ideas, right? They are bringing, right? They are looking at UFOs as a type of messenger or symptom of this evolution. And they think that the people who see the UFOs are the highly evolved ones. That's another fact, like that they really do. And Rosicrucianism, these are the guys who think that like through this like evolution, like through this self-aware process, these protocols, right, that you begin to become a little bit more enlightened, a little bit more elevated above the rest. How elevated could you be above the rest?
Described a hierarchy of beings.
Part of what he used to say was that there was a hierarchy of beings, and he placed God at the top. He was Christian, and then he placed angels below God, and then he placed beings like off-planet beings. He called them off-planet beings, and then he placed, and this is where it gets really weird to me, factions in the intelligence community, and then normal humans. That was the hierarchy.
Okay.
What the fuck is this world? What have they done to us? What did they do to us?
For real though? What? Okay, so this little section you see here, God, angels, aliens, some factions within the intelligence community, and then humans. This is what information does. This is the enlightened ones. These are the people who believe information is enlightening. And now, like, okay, cool. So fucking they got this slot there. Sorry for cussing. They got this slot here. So who occupies that slot? Well, some factions, not all, some. Right? We've all heard that the intelligence communities and whatnot are fractured. Well, I think maybe some of them believing that they're better than humans might have something to do with it. I'm just throwing out theories here. So you got this guy, right? Tyler D. Tim Taylor. He's now talked about a lot. My guess is he's going to show up on The View or something soon and spill his guts because, this is an interesting fact, right? That they believe that they're a little bit above the rest. And again, this is what they believe information does for them.
Let's go back much further.
Right? They believe that this information gives them enlightenment, and then their practices, the things that they do. For those who don't know, Tim Taylor is known for his protocols, his things that he does, and that he does like to get information from where? From alien beings. You know, Tim Taylor is a scientist. He's around. I would say that he's in the mix for show. I know a lot of people listening would also agree that Tim Taylor's in the mix. We're going to get him on the show, friend of the show. Okay, great. We got this kind of like, what is it, a social club from the 1600s who like loves science and like maybe how does it relate to UFOs? Again, through the genetic situation, right? So people are evolving. The ability to perceive UFOs may be a symptom of their plan working. Okay, so the idea of monitoring the people who are seeing them is pretty high of importance, right? It's pretty high because these people think that UFOs influence the human race. Well, how could that be? Are they aliens? Do these people think that they're aliens? Nah, they don't. They think they're angels. Here is a Rosicrucian scholar, lore. I don't know what you'd call him. Like I would call him a high priest, but I think that's probably not the right idea. Sorry again, the camera. Listen, guys, we had a camera glitch. I'm trying to get it back in the mix. It is not. So we're just at horrifying AI Tupa for now. But check this video out. This one's interesting. This is a little long. This is a man named Rudolf Steiner. So what Rudolf Steiner was doing in the 1910s, 1890s is kind of like what Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée are doing, right? I mean, maybe to a lesser extreme. Maybe. I just heard a noise. Is my camera back? No, that was me for F me, man. Okay, so what was it? What were they doing back in the day? What were they doing back in the day? Well, Rudolf Steiner was talking about this stuff, but there was no UFOs back then. Okay, he called these things like, and there's no aliens and stuff, but he did recognize the influence of these higher beings, these higher realms, just like, Tyler D did, right? Just like Tyler D did. And like he understood that there was these influences in the mix, right? And so he directly related them to angels. And listen to what he says here. Okay, we're going to kind of skip around. This is going to go a little long. I'm going to end it a little bit after that. I want you guys to listen. Again, Rudolf Steiner is a scholar. He is a Rosicrucian. He was a mystic. He is a god among men for these people. So what he says kind of goes here. The very first sentence kind of cuts out, but what he says is, in the very beginning, to find out what the angels of form are doing in the astral body. Check this out.
Are doing in our astral body. We must advance to a certain level of clairvoyant perception so that we can look into our astral body and see what is going on there.
All right, so that's referring to, again, in the film Shadows of the Invisible Sun 2, Miracles. I have this video from Peter Gilbert, and he is, again, a Rosicrucian scholar, and he says that people who are studying this stuff and really are serious about it, they're trying to enlighten themselves. They're trying to achieve a new sense of awareness, right? They're trying to open up parts of their mind that weren't open up before, and that's their goal in order to perceive things. One of those things is like themselves, like legitimately. One of those things is like we have to look inside and see like what we are, who we are, how we are, and why we are these things, in order to like really learn and advance. And that's echoing what Rudolf Steiner is saying here, right? If we want to know what the angels of form, we'll find out what he means by that, are doing in our astral body, in our mind, we have to first achieve a certain level of clairvoyant perception. We have to first achieve a certain level of self-awareness to really be able to like look past the surface level of these images that are being projected to us, how we normally read our thoughts. Like you can look at bigger pictures. Carl Jung went on to talk about these archetypes, right? Viewing yourself and these processes, these actions, these reactions as types of archetypes. It gives you a bigger picture, allows you to zoom out a lot from it. You become removed a little bit from the humanness of yourself. So I'll let him continue.
We have to achieve at least a certain level of imaginative perception. Then we will be able to see that the hierarchy of the angels is forming images in our astral body. Without imaginative perception, we could not know that the angels are continuously forming images in our astral body, images that appear and then vanish again in constant ebb and flow.
He's literally talking about your imagination, the visual imagination. And this is interesting because, again, this is like in the early 1900s. You got to remember, like, there was no psychology or anything. No one really was putting pen to paper on the things that were happening inside the mind yet, right? Science is still brand new, right? All of this stuff is brand new. But not only that, you do have a level of like what they call like evolution, where people were evolving. So before, like in the 1400s, for instance, people did not have the same clairvoyant perception. They didn't have the same intellect, right? You go further back, right? They didn't have the same ability to use the mind. Like, and I'm not saying that their minds were weaker or were not, they just weren't prominent. Like, let's say like you can be aware of only so many things to get by, but intellect was not always one of them. This is a belief held by the Rosicrucians, right? And that through their practices specifically, they brought about this change, this evolution for people. And then the idea of understanding what your imagination is and how it's a series of images that's interesting in and of itself. But then the idea of giving this to the responsibility of so-called angels or higher dimensional beings is something that I thought was pretty unique. It's pretty fascinating in my opinion.
Without these images, we could not develop toward a future that is in line with the intentions of the spirits of form. What the spirits of form want to achieve with us until the end of our earthly development must first be embodied in images, and these images will later be instrumental in transforming humanity. They will then become real. Those are the images the spirits of form are already now creating in our astral body with the help of the angels and reality. We can see and access the images the angels generate in our astral body once we have developed our thinking to a certain level of clairvoyance. We can then observe these images and see that they're formed according to very specific impulses and principles. We'll find that the process that gives rise to these images holds within it the forces for our future development. Strange as this may sound, we can observe the angels as they're working and see that with their work, they're carrying out a definite intention for the social structure of our future life on earth. In other words, they want to generate images in our astral body that will lead to specific social conditions and structures for the human society of the future. It is really only in our fifth post-Atlantean epoch, which began in the 15th century, that thinking has become powerful. We could say it is mighty in its powerlessness. Unlike in previous times, since the 15th century, thinking has become able to lead the consciousness soul into the spiritual realm. And at the same, it also gained the power to prevent that soul from entering the spiritual world. In contrast to earlier eras, in our time, theories and sciences are consciously trying to rob us of our divinity and of our experience of the divine. This has not been possible prior to the age of the consciousness soul, and that is why the Ahrimanic spirits are trying especially hard now to spread teachings that blot out our awareness of our divine origin.
All right, that's kind of a key thing. All right, I think it's something to harp on. He's saying, like, we're going forward. They're trying to essentially motivate us with images in order to achieve change within the human evolution, right? Our earthly development is what he calls it. So that's what these things are constantly doing, pushing us forward to progress. One of the things that has happened with that relationship with Rosicrucians and these people is that something called the awakening of this intelligence that took place in the early 15th century, right? That people began to use their brains a little bit differently, and thinking became prominent as opposed to a background noise situation. And what he says is like it became powerful in its powerlessness, that it can't do anything normally, but because it became so much more on the forefront of the process of like living, like for us, it just became more of what part we borrow through consciousness, right? We think things through a lot differently. We developed so many different things from that moment. He says Ahrimanic, and Ahriman is a Rosicrucian word or title that they gave the Antichrist. So they look at like they have Antichrist, they have Lucifer, they have Satan, they have these things that kind of mean the same thing. But for the Rosicrucians, Lucifer doesn't always mean something negative, whereas Ahriman does, right? These forces that are taking advantage of the weaknesses of man, and technology, right? And ideas, if developed while convenient, can also exacerbate the weaknesses of man. So it's one of those double-edged swords. So through our intelligence, we develop technology, and through technology, we develop this double-edged sword where we can like be closer to something while also being further away from it at the same time, if not most of the time. So it could be a negative, could be a positive. And the development of technology is considered Luciferian, right? The idea, something birthed from these ideas, the ability for man to think. And this changed our direction a lot, and it changed the job of these so-called angels. Again, the hierarchy of beings. Angels are above us, but they don't work independently. They're for us, right? This idea, and I don't mean winged angels. I don't understand the form that Rosicrucians think of as angels outside of geometric shapes, and we'll get to that in a second. But essentially, these guys think that like angels and stuff are they take the form in the physical realm as geometric shapes. One of the Platonic solids. It's a very bizarre thing. But the Platonic solids are, back in the day, developed by Plato. And the reason why they thought about these shapes was specifically to keep like these aren't you don't find these in nature necessarily unless you're like looking in specific like crystals or something like that. But like, these shapes are when they thought about these things back in ancient Greece, like when they thought about them, their thinking changed. You know, it took a lot of mental work to get these imagined in your mind. Now, I mean, we can see a visual instantly because we all have screens in front of us. We have all this stuff, but that's not the same way. That's not the case back in the day, right? So getting these shapes and imagining these shapes, it advanced. It was like an exercise for the mind, the brain, or the mind, right? To really hone in on imaginative thinking. That's how, you know, I think we take for granted how we think today. But they assigned every one of these things to an element, every one of these shapes. Now, there's only 5, and the reason why they're important is because these exist in every dimension. They exist flat, they exist 3D, they exist 4D, 5D, and they don't really change. And it's because of the relationship between the sides and the corners. Mathematically, they're constant. Like there's something unique about them. 3 of them are made out of triangles. One's a cube, and one's made out of pentagram. Spooky. They assigned them elements, which is interesting, fascinating, actually, I think. So what'd you get? First, you got fire, and that's the tetrahedron. Octahedron, air. Icosahedron, water. The cube of earth. Isn't that funny? The idea of like 3D, right? The solid place, the solid ground. It's a cube. Super. I love that shit. This is really work. It really works for me. And then this one, the dodecahedron, and this was like the universe. When they called it the ether. It's not the universe as a whole. It's what the universe is made of. Like the empty space you think you see, they called it the ether. And the ether's back in the mix. If you guys heard about it and thought it was gone, it's actually back. So these guys are way ahead of their time when they talk about these platonic solids. So yeah, the spirits of form, these angels, they may take this form or some relation of it or some you know, example of it or whatever, right? So back to this.
Then everything the angel did was the development.
This isn't interesting. Like,
therefore,
he is talking about what the angel's job is. All right. The angels who produce images in our mind, again, this is Rosicrucian basically doctrine. Okay. Like the angels that produce the images in our mind have a mission. Their mission is to push humanity forward towards progress. If Rudolf Steiner was kind of a G here. He predicted that the 100-year period after he gave this speech was, I think, early 1900s, 1907 or something like that. He said that this will be a year of trial, that there will be, listen, like basically the aliens, possibly, the angels have a job to do, and if they can't do it, shit's about to pop off.
What they must accomplish can only be achieved in our earthly development. Therefore, if we were to deliberately ignore all this after the development of our consciousness soul, then everything the angel did was for nothing and is reduced to nothing but a game. That is, if we deliberately and consciously ignore what I've talked about here today, the work of the angel is reduced to just a game. It is rendered futile. It is only when we allow these things to become real that the angel's work is redeemed in all its seriousness and purposefulness. You may wonder what will happen if humanity insists on sleeping through the important spiritual revelation that is coming.
This is where it gets juicy as all hell.
Then the angels would have to find a different way to do what they had intended to accomplish with the images in our astral body. I've often talked about the coming of the etheric Christ, and if people are not awake for it, and for the other simultaneous occurrences, then the angels would have to find another approach. As it turns out, what we don't allow the angels to accomplish by our refusing to wake up to things, they will then have to carry out by means of our sleeping body. In other words, what we are sleeping through in our waking hours and thus prevent the angels from fully accomplishing, those things would then have to be achieved with the help of our sleeping physical body and our etheric body, both of which remain behind in our bed when we're asleep. The angels would then be looking in those bodies for the forces they need to help them accomplish their tasks. The tasks that could not be carried out while we are awake, and our waking soul is in our etheric body and physical body, will then have to be done with our sleeping etheric body and physical body. That is, during the time when our I and our astral body are outside us while we are sleeping. When we're asleep like this to the important events around us, we run a great risk. That is, if humanity continues with its refusal to turn to the Spirit, then at some point before the third millennium, the consequences of our stubborn resistance could descend upon us. It's really not long anymore to the third millennium, which begins in the year 2000. If the angels have to work with our sleeping body instead of being able to use our waking soul to accomplish their task, they would have to move all their work out of our astral body and immerse it in our etheric body in order to carry out their mission. However, we will not be there and thus not be part of this. If the angels have to carry out their task in the etheric body, they can do so only if we're not there, because if we were there in our waking state, we would keep the angels from doing their work. If these angels then have to work in our etheric body, in our absence, they themselves will undergo a certain change that I cannot talk about because it is one of the higher secrets of initiation science that must not yet be revealed.
Okay. So that's kind of an intense piece of info, and I think a good spot to pause it because, like, you know, the angels having to move their work from our mind, from producing images in our mind while we sleep, to producing images and experiences in our waking mind, like in a different way, is something that's kind of bizarre. And when you look at the experiences as described by abductees, people with missing time, a lot of stuff, it kind of rings true with what Rudolph predicted here, which is frightening. It's a bizarre thing to consider that we could be looking at, or they could have been looking at, right? Let's just take the Rosicrucians, like they could have been looking at this from a different angle. They continue to look at it from a different angle, right? Look at Valet. He continues to look at the UFO phenomenon not as aliens visiting Earth, but as like souls or spirits or angels affecting humanity. That it's a symptom of that. What's happening is a symptom of that. It falls directly, in my opinion, falls directly in line with what Steiner says. And you got to look at people who say that they're in the invisible college and what they believe, where they're from. Like, think about why you've heard the term invisible college, but you probably never heard about the Rosicrucians. They're connected. They're connected. They're the same thing. Like, so, it's something that people should keep in mind and consider. I'm not trying to expose anything. It's not like freaking it's not like this, like Scientology or something like that. It's not like that. But when you look at how these kind of thought leaders of the UFO research and ufology, what they believe versus what is allowed to build up in the minds of UFO enthusiasts, there's a clear difference. There's a clear difference. People who are enthusiastic about UFOs, they often talk about aliens and what they think and what they want to do for us and how they want to bring technology and how they judge us and whatnot. It obviously has some religious undertones, but for the most part, like it's completely devoid of conversations about angels. It's devoid about conversations about it being a sign of humans evolving. Like, in no way is it ever like represented that way by a lot of UFO enthusiasts. But Jacques Vallée is not a nobody. He's been around for so long doing this, and his inception point into this was from Rosicrucianism. They believe that they're pushing humanity to see things, and while we might want to believe that the current UFO sightings are actually maybe even if we're evolving, maybe these UFOs have been around forever, we're just now seeing them. That's not really what they think either. They think that, like, the craft and the beings inside of the craft, if they are in there, right, that they're angels. They think that they're these angels. They're part of our consciousness. They're part of our creative thought. They have a part to play there, and that they are around us instead of inside of our mind now, that they've transferred, they went interdimensional. They've developed technology and things and methods and forms for them to take. And it's so I don't know, it's so held secret that even though Rudolf Steiner talks about so much openly, like so much about Rosicrucianism and their beliefs and their mysticism and all that stuff, he talks about it openly. He refused to talk about that. You know what I mean? Like he refused to really dive into like what that meant. He was still like, I talk a lot about this stuff, but this is the one I can't really talk about too much. And that I find that to be very, very fascinating. Very fascinating. Here's a guy who's freely chatting about all this weird mystical stuff, and then is like, I'm not going to tell you what form these beings are going to take when they show up here in your bedroom. But he does explain a little bit what they'll do and why they're going to do it. What he says is that they're going to induce experiences, visions, right, in your body, in your mind, while you're not in it. You can't be in it, right? And in this is the idea of the mind, the body, and the spirit, right? The threefold aspect of a person. And this is when he was using the terminology, when Steiner was using the terminology, the etheric, the astral, and the body, right? That's like the body, mind, and like the soul. And so when you're gone, like when you're sleeping, you're not in your body anymore. And you're not really in your mind either. There's something else going on, right? You're multiple places, but you're not there. That's what he's talking about, is that while you're sleeping, these things are going to happen to you. And it's so strange. A lot of these occurrences happen around the bed, right? A lot of these occurrences, they happen while people are driving, right? Or maybe they doze off. Or maybe these things can be just induced. Maybe you can just literally be alive and walking around, and then suddenly, boom. And then the why is a big question. Why? Why would you be approached this way? Why are some abductees, if we can cross over, or let's say contactees, why are they being chosen to be contacted? What's going on in their life? Again, you go and you look at these people, you look at these Rosicrucian statements, like you look at them and they give you an outline of like what's going on. That's why I included the part about Joseph Campbell in my film, right? The idea of story, the hero's journey. Everyone is living a story, right? And what's the point of it, right? If you think about your life in terms of the story, like what are you doing? What's the end? What kind of character are you? What kind of story is it? Is it a tragedy? Is it a comedy? What's happening? Like it's an aspect. I mean, narrative therapy is real, right? Looking at things and analyzing this way is really smart, because humans are really good at storytelling, and even better at story listening. So there's this element to it where like you just have a way to analyze events through a story. And I bring that up because in script writing and in storytelling, there is is there evidence to suggest, let me find it real quick, sorry about that, but there in storytelling there's a purpose, right? There's a purpose for things to happen, right? You're asking a character to change. The story hopefully involves a character changing, a character going through something terrible, or some kind of transformation, overcoming the odds, and then achieving something new, achieving something powerful. And that's the idea, right? So you get these experiences from UFO and contactees and experiencers, and they're not always fleshed out, but when you can flesh them out based on the data provided, you can find a lot of interesting things, like trauma being a big key in these experiences. And they don't induce trauma. People are going through trauma when experiences happen. So it's very similar to stories. If you were going to look at what happened to Peter Parker, well, he experienced a trauma and then it changed him. And it changed what he wanted to do. You know what I mean? All these stories are like that. That someone is changed. And I feel like when you look at these, like I included a segment about dreams as well, right? The idea of dreams is interesting, because dreams are like a really useful tool for the mind to explore virtual realities and worlds in order to learn lessons that are too complex or too risky to learn otherwise. And so, like, the idea that these angels or these beings, whatever, these things, whatever you want to call them, are in the mix, like within your dreams, like utilizing the dream world as a way to project their images and walk you through experiences that they have entirely all the control of, I think is really smart. And then you have this researcher, you have Matt Walker, who went on to say, like, you know, dreams are a form of therapy. They're a form of emotional therapy. Like, what out there? I mean, have you ever been in therapy before? Because it's pretty intense. Like, I mean, it's not always a great, but it's also complicated, right? It's a complicated process. Like, it not only, I mean, it's complicated because you have to figure out how to go do it or whatever, right? Like, there's that, like, okay, I'm talking to somebody, but like the idea of it is still interesting. Like, there's not like I don't think there's a bunch of animals in nature who develop therapists and need for this type of stuff. It's a fascinating ask, um, but the fact that we could do this for ourselves unconsciously while we're dreaming, it should speak to that, to how bizarre that is, how bizarre dreaming is. And I'll let Matt Walker kind of talk about it a little bit more.
Think we dream, what place do we go to when we dream, and why are they useful? Not just the assimilation aspect, but just like all the crazy visuals that we get with dreams.
I suspect that dreaming is more metabolically costly as a conscious experience than not dreaming. So you could still have REM sleep, but absent the conscious experience of dreaming was probably less metabolically costly. And we've now since discovered that dreams have a function. The first, as we mentioned, creativity. The second is that dreams provide a form of overnight therapy. Dreaming is a form of emotional first aid. And it's during dream sleep at night that we take these difficult, painful experiences that we've had during the day, sometimes traumatic, and dream sleep acts almost like a nocturnal soothing balm. And it sort of just takes the sharp edges off those difficult, painful experiences so that you come back the next day and you feel better.
All right, so that's like a powerful thing, right? That's so powerful. The idea that that's happening in our sleep, that we're being healed that way. Now, if you cut yourself, your body will heal itself, right? You don't have to consciously do that. There are things doing it, though, right? There are things that are doing it under your energy, but not consciously by you, right? You have like blood cells and everything. They're clotting it. They're dropping these little platelets or whatever. They're like, there's all this stuff happening that's healing your body, healing a wound. And they're done by these little creatures, right? And if someone were to tell you that in like the 1600s, that there's these little creatures that are doing all this stuff, you'd be seen as crazy. And so what Rudolf Steiner is saying and what Rosicrucians believe is that there's these creatures, there's conscious creatures who exist in a different dimension, the same dimension as your thoughts, and that they are acting, right? And they are doing things for you in your mind that we could see and we could interpret and we could understand if we only looked, right? We interpret it normally as just a byproduct of being alive. Thought, consciousness, dreams, imagination, hope, fantasy, right? We just concoct these like whatever excuses for what they do and why they're there, when in fact, right, you could easily look at them differently. And that's what these guys did. That's what Rudolf Steiner did, and that's what he's talking about in a lot of these talks, right? Is like there's so much shit going on inside of you. There's so much going on inside of you, and it's responsible for so much. And that's a novel idea and a really cool way to like look at stuff, and I love that. But then to go on and say those things that are doing that, they're not as harmless as your blood cells. They're not as autonomous as your white blood cells. They're not just doing things like a tardigrade or something like that. Like they're fully aware. They might be more aware than you, but they might not have the ability to function in what we call the real world, or like physical space, with the same freedoms as we do. They can't construct something. They would need a person to do that. right? There's this limitation there, but their awareness, their intelligence is not to be, you can't really judge that. I don't think you should judge that. They don't judge that. They give full credence to these things. They think these things are angels, right? In the hierarchy of beings, you got people way down here. You got the people who know what I'm talking about right here. Then you got beings from other planet, off-world beings, which are like, you know, like humans, but better than, right? And then you got angels, which are not physical. But something is happening between these two levels, between aliens, angels and aliens. Something's going on where the beings who were not physical can somehow occupy a physical body or an avatar. You could find no shortage of mentions of avatars with Gary Nolan and other leaders of the ufology like world, the disclosure effort, who are also very much in line with this stuff here. They talk about the grays being avatars and the grays being like, you know what I mean? Like, not real. They're not really robots, but they're not really, there's nothing in there. They are containers for remote consciousnesses, right? They can see, smell, taste, they can do all this stuff, but all those sensory inputs, they don't go into a brain inside the being. They're channeled outward to some other being, which is fine. It's pretty sick idea. Guys, listen, I really appreciate y'all for popping in. This conversation can go on forever, should go on forever. No one really talks about it ever. I see now that we got lots of stuff. Look at this. Someone wrote a lot. Mercurius. That's dope. I'll read that when I have the time. You're dropping straight books in the mix. I gotta thank everybody for being in here. We got B. We got Screen. Heather Birdie. B, what up? B got the power. I modded B and Heather Birdie. I just, you know, I mean, I can mod everybody in here. The next mod's going to be Thomas Fessler, friend of the show. We have LC2. I think these were, someone's talking about race. God, you guys, you YouTubers are just as fun as the Twitter guys. Dear Lord, dude. We got Ernie in the mix. Zim's in the mix. Zim, we were worried about you, dog. Zim's over there in Baltimore. Thanks for checking in with us, dude. You know what I mean? We got family out there in Baltimore, dog, like UFO fam. So it's just good to check in. Hearts in the chat. Hearts go out to the city of Baltimore for that bridge, dude. That was crazy. That was real wild shit. But yeah, we got Mr. Toad in here. Thank you, Mr. Toad. We got lots on this subject, right? I'm not a religious person. I'm not a Rosicrucian or a Scientologist or a Catholic or a Mormon, but this show was brought to you by the Mormon Church. The church, no, I'm playing, it wasn't. They couldn't afford me. No, the topic is vast, but like really honestly, guys, like there is a group that's been talking about this for over 100 years. They've been anticipating this. They found their way into NASA. They found their way into the CIA. They found their way into every aspect of this world, of the control mechanism. And they have their hands on what they call like these craft, these real things. And we should really listen to what they are telling us these things are. We should really listen to what they're saying. To what could this mean? Like, we should not be fantasizing that the UFO mystery is whatever we think it is, whatever we imagine, whatever we can fantasize. You know, like, I think one of the things we could do besides having the bodies and finding the craft and all that stuff, look at who's giving us the information and where it's coming from and what they believe, right? Because like sometimes their beliefs are so strange that they're not really gonna like straight up tell you, right? They're not going to give you everything right away. Sometimes their beliefs are just a little more out there. And like, you know, they tell you on the front cover of their book. And then you got to go listen to these guys talking about what the invisible college really is and what Rosicrucians are. You're like, oh, let's piece this together. What's the cave of Brahma? What does evolution mean? Why did the gateway papers, right? Why was the gateway process, like the gateway stuff? Why was that based off of Itzhak Bentoff's work, who was obsessed with spiritual evolution? all of it really works together. I think if we can shed the preconceived notion that the government fed us, right? That these things are, at least all of them, are beings from another planet who found Earth and want to come here and exploit our, I don't know, the casinos or something. I don't know how we would ever think that. I don't know how people think that these guys showed up here because they liked our women or something. It's just bananas. When in reality, the real heads of this stuff, the real weirdos, the Rudolf Steiners, the Edgar Caseys, the Mel Gibsons, you know, the Coopers, the Peter Gilberts,
authoritative.
These guys know. They know what this stuff is. And you were like, oh, secret society. Yes, it's all connected. It's all connected in a pretty fun way, though, right? And not in a crazy way, not a scary way, not in a skull and bones type of thing. I'm not calling anybody a cult here. I'm just saying that the beliefs of these guys are very much. I'm not calling anybody a cult here. Look at the still frame I put it on. Kind of culty. That's my bad. That's my bad. But yeah. I guess we can talk about these shapes again. Let's keep it safe with shapes, y'all. Yeah, these things are deep. These are deeply rooted in ufology. Look at this. You know what this is? Someone's model of the universe based around platonic solids. The cube, the triangle, right? The dodecahedron, the tetrahedron. Duality. Look at this. Does that look like anything? You ever think why people think that there's like a pyramid under the pyramid? Why was the pyramid built in a platonic solid? That would mean, and for those of you guys who are just tuning in here, I hate goodbyes. The pyramid, right, of Giza, like why are they still standing? The idea of a platonic solid is that it exists in multiple dimensions at one time, right? So you have an idea here that the pyramid is also existing there, right, in another dimension that we can't see or sense. What's it doing up there or down there? What dimension is it? It's worth looking into. Next week we're going to talk about Donald Trump. No, we're going to talk about anything, literally anything. I'm going to try to stream every Tuesday. I was doing Tupa Tuesdays on X. That was fun. For all the X fam, I think I probably got like 3 listeners here on YouTube. The camera died. I don't expect too much of a YouTube audience in this mix, but yeah, this was a fun thing. Thank you guys for popping in. Thanks for showing up. We have Skyfire News tonight live, right, at 6. That's in about 2.5 hours. We'll be live with Skyfire News talking about all the UFO news. If you don't follow them, you definitely should. I should have left a link, but I always forget to do that. Follow us there. Follow me there. If you follow me on X, you can find it in my bio. Please, guys, like the space or like the show, like the YouTube channel. I'm hoping to stream more, get these subscribers back in the mix. I did play the film Miracles live today. So a lot of people were looking for that. A lot of people were like, when is that coming out? It just did. Just did, baby. So until next time, guys, peace.